2 years ago, Emilio Osorio sat down with ChatGPT 3.5, and in about 30 seconds, he realized his career was over. Not because the AI was perfect, because he could see clearly, without denial, exactly what he was: human based LLM. Someone who processed language, compared it against a body of knowledge, and produced calibrated answers. For nearly 3 decades, that was his value. Now, for $20 a month, you could now get the same thing. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "I'm pretty toasted." Most people in that moment reach for denial. They find the things the AI gets wrong and hold on to those. They convince themselves the nuance, the context, the human element, those things are irreplaceable. Emilio got depressed for a few months. Then he tried to help his wife with marketing stuff because he didn't know what to do. He did three things. First, he stopped consulting completely, cold turkey. Second, he spent 2 years figuring out exactly why AI assisted engineering fails and built a framework to fix it. Third, he gave the whole thing away for free. That framework is called Grace. And the insight at its center, the one that took him 2 years to arrive at, is this: the LLM doesn't fail. The horse doesn't fail. It's the driver that fails. By the end of this conversation, you're going to understand what that means, why it changes how you write code, how you lead teams, and how you think about your own value in a world where AI can do the job. This is the Scale and Dilemma. Emilio, you wrote something publicly, I don't know, a couple of days or a couple of weeks, right, ago. And Vicente, the friend that we have in common, sent it to me. And I want to start with that. You say in that, I don't know, was it a LinkedIn post or was it a Facebook post?
I think
What
it's a
was it?
Medium podcast.
Medium. Oh, that is way better, right? So
Yeah.
you say that you sat down with one of the new AIs like 2 years ago and realized it was doing 80% of what you used to do as a software developer, as a software consultant, in just seconds, right? So
Yeah.
that's a confronting thing to discover after 20 years of being a developer. What was the moment actually look like?
Well, at the moment, I was not doing software development. I was doing software development consulting.
Okay.
Most of my work at that time was consisted in helping leaders understand how to transform their organizations to have, agile, lean, and those kind of methodologies.
Yep.
And I dealt with a lot of nuance and context on that.
Hmm.
So one of the issues that I faced commonly was just, how do I apply a scale and agile framework to this kind of situation and that stuff. So I just, put the questions into the chat GPT chat and realized that, I'm pretty toasted. I'm not going to be able to get a living out of this.
I know
Uh,
the feeling. I know the feeling. Was it in a specific task or a client
it just,
deliverable or what?
um, the job at the moment, as I see that in retrospective, I was just essentially a human-based LLM.
Okay.
That's essentially. I needed to understand whatever our customers were dealing and compare that to a conceptual framework that I had in my mind, which is the thing I coach on, and ask and answer those questions. And LLM is particularly well designed to replace that kind of job because that's essentially what we do. We process language out of a body of knowledge, which has probabilistic weights on that, and that probabilistic weight is my own experience and my own things, and I didn't see really quite any difference into that cognitive capacity that we were being able to use for $20 a month and what I have.
Mhm.
That's in essence.
So Emilio lost his career to AI, got depressed, stopped consulting, but then something unexpected happened. He went back to something he hadn't done in 20 years: programming. And he brought a question with him, one from his research at Sun Microsystems in the early 2000s. Back then, his team studied what actually drives software quality: not process, not experience, not the size of the team or the tools they used. The single biggest factor was motivation. The most motivated developer consistently produced better software. Nothing else came close. So he asked himself, if motivation is what drives quality in humans, what drives quality when the developer is an AI? And here's where it gets interesting. His answer came from an unexpected place. He got a late autism diagnosis in his early 50s. And suddenly he understood something about communication he'd been missing his whole life. How much of human conversation depends on inference, on context, on empathy that fills in what you didn't say. An LLM can do any of that. It takes everything literally. It's, in his word, a good natured autistic, not human intelligence that only lives in one conversation. And the realization sent him straight into the problem that Grace is built to solve. Because if the LLM takes everything literally, what happens when the context is wrong? When decisions go undocumented, when the AI has no memory of what worked and what didn't, it drifts quietly. And by the time you notice, you're 6 months into a relationship you never should have started. That's exactly what most AI assisted engineers looks like today. In this part of the conversation, Emilio tells us what he built to fix it. And how do you feel at first? I mean, threat, relief,
Well,
curiosity, what it
I felt
was.
panic, but I
Really?
remember the panic. Grab a towel, and everything will be fine. So I was depressed like a few months to be honest. I tried to help my wife build up marketing practices, but I'm not really good at marketing, as you probably realize, and I just didn't know what to do with my life. I've been expending the last 20 years building a consulting practice, and that the rug was pulled,
Mhm.
But I knew one thing clearly, Darwin. I shouldn't be spending more time doing what I was doing. I needed to grasp this thing, understand it, and try to see if it's going to replace me. I need to understand what are the edges, what are the use cases, what I can do with it, how can I improve myself, how I can raise myself into the challenge. No, so I think that's probably one of the essential things of being human. We adapt. That's essentially we what we do. We adapt. We build tools to adapt to the new conditions of the environment, and I think that that's essentially what, at least for person in my personal opinion, can save us all from any this and any other disruption that technology brings us. I think that we remain empowered individuals as long as we can see ourselves as people, being able to learn how to handle new situations.
Yeah, I get it. So you've been building enterprise software since 2005, right?
Mm,
Ish.
Probably a little
Around.
better, a little farther. I began doing my enterprise work in 1996.
Okay, so
So
that's more than just 2 decades. It's almost 3 decades, right?
20 years,
It
something like that.
understanding how organizations work and how teams fail, how software gets delivered. But when you saw, you told me behind scenes that it was ChatGPT 3.0, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
3.5.
3.5. So when you saw the GPT AI could do, did any of that experience suddenly feel obsolete, or did it feel more valuable? Because
At
you
first,
have experience. I
at
mean,
first, at first, I felt completely, superseded with technology.
uh-huh.
I felt like an old version of something that was emerging.
Yeah,
But I, I I clearly saw that I didn't need to compete with it because I couldn't.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
the essence. So
This is a fight I'm not gonna go into. Right? I'm not gonna
yeah,
jump into.
I didn't resist it. I
Mhm.
mean, I had a lot of work during my personal life to try to reduce my ego and try to be, a more self-conscious person of how I work with things, and my whole approach to technology is dealing with that frontier between humanity and technology. That's why my company is called Sistemas Humanos. So I think that's an unfair advantage in my approach to technology, because I've been helping people adapt to technology changes all my life. So I just apply my own things, and the first thing was just drop it, drop consulting, stop selling consulting. The only way that you are going to drive yourself, Emilio, to find another living is to stop doing what you're doing.
Okay.
So it drove an economical crisis in my company, because my company was built around my consulting practice.
Yeah.
When I stopped doing consulting practice, I needed to find some other revenue stream. So at first, the first thing was not drove directly in doing software programming. It was just, shutting down completely my time spent on something other that was not AI driving. And that drove, 2 years of replacing that revenue stream with support, DevSecOps work, and things more related to tooling and actual, technical software development work, which is what I think that is needed even in the human-based technology. So that was a safe bet, and that drove me to get myself again into the software development thing. I wanted to try that. I have already, you know, saw by myself that the consulting business was dead, and it is.
Hmm.
And but I I'm a programmer in the inside. I just left
Yeah.
programming, 20 years ago,
Uh-huh.
but it was kind of exciting to get myself into modern stack, Node, TypeScript, and all those things that I didn't knew of a couple of months ago or a few
Okay.
months ago. So I was eager to get back into the software development job and see what I could do with this help,
Yeah.
with the model help.
And that's one point, right, that I want to touch here. Like, so is there any kind of expertise that becomes more valuable when AI can do the execution? I mean, what is that the human can afford to that?
You guys are going to love this. People
Okay.
skills. People skills.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
One of the things that I did research when I was at Sun Microsystems in the early 2000s is what were the driving factors of software quality in a human-based process. And after a lot of research and tests and everything, we came to the conclusion that the single biggest critical success factor for software quality, you know what is?
What is it?
Software development motivation. Nothing
Oh.
else. It doesn't
Okay.
matter if you speak English, if you
Uh-huh.
went to Stanford, if you had the opportunity to work in a big company with a lot of process. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many years of experience you have. The only difference in quality that we could clearly correlate was the level of motivation of the software programmer. So that was my drive. How can
Well,
you?
Emilio, I have. I mean, I'm really sorry. I have to stop you right there. I literally have goosebumps here. Right, like, oh my god, what you're saying here is like, wow. Yeah, because at the end of the things, I believe that AI, what is doing, talking about software development, is kind of like the democratization of software development, isn't it?
Yeah,
So you
in
have.
essence, we are dealing with the digital photography digital photograph moment, which came in the early 90s for software development. We are democratizing photography. It's going to is becoming cheap. One of my other passions when I was a kid was doing photography, but I was
Mhm.
not a rich kid, so it was a really
I know the
expensive
feeling.
thing for me, and it
Mhm.
could really frustrated me when it came the digital programming. I was doing software programming, so photography was not an option, but I could clearly see how that could drive a lot of art, a lot of creativity, and a lot of other things. We now have social media and deep fakes and everything, and
Yeah.
and that all started with digital photography. So
Hmm.
we are facing that moment in the industry, and the happy news I got you is that digital photography didn't kill the photographer.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
we are in the same stage at the moment.
Okay.
This thing is not going to kill us.
Hmm.
It's just going to kill the photographers that didn't bring anything to the table. That just pointed the camera and shoot. We have machines that do that in the supermarkets, and you can take your photographs yourself and print it. So
Yeah.
that kind of software development.
said.
The one that is not passionate
Hmm.
about learning, understanding things, and managing their creativity, I think those are the ones that are going to be probably in need of a big personal reflection. It's not a marketing, it's how you approach the development of your own skills, and take responsibility as a software development of being able to continue bringing value to your company or your customers in this new age. And I think that's doesn't require expertise, it just requires will.
Yeah. Well, you said something in that post that that I keep coming back to. You say the best way you found to communicate with a computer was to talk to it like a person, and that is a thought that you more about human communication than 20 years of consulting, right? That's a really provocative idea. What do you mean by that?
Well, LLMs are essentially trained in human written language. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the human written language is different from the human spoken language. We don't write the same thing the same way we speak. We don't normally, when we write things, most of us
Mm-hmm.
try to be more concise, be more have a more thoughtful way of using the words, and a little more, at least the people I work with, we
Mm-hmm.
try to be more, specific, concise, and all those things. And when we talk colloquially with people, we assume a lot of shared understanding. We assume a lot of things.
Yeah.
When I was doing consulting, I just didn't have cultural differences because I work with people from so many countries and different levels of experience. And I do not know all. I was ignorant of most of our coaches' working environments at the time. So being able to communicate specifically and clearly with people was one of the skills I didn't have and I had to develop. So I was very conscious about how I talk to people because my work depended on that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I began to use the LLM, I did what was used at the time. You just copy paste things and ask it questions like it was a you know super Google search of sorts.
Yeah.
I didn't spoke to it like a person. And why is that important? I think there are two critical success factors that drive reliability on the work we do with AI right now. The first one is we need to have a shared understanding with the
Okay.
machine.
Mm-hmm.
And that shared understanding requires that what I'm communicating, the wording that I am using, is something that the LLM can, um, you know, um, collapse the probability function around that concept.
Okay.
So you need to be very conscious on how you um, ask things and be able to use the correct words so you can get the correct results. A normal human, can infer from context what you're referring to. An LLM cannot do that.
Yeah.
So you need to be pretty conscious, as you need to be pretty conscious when you talk with customers, clients, and
Yeah, I know.
bosses. That kind of a consciousness. You're speaking here with someone that takes everything literal, that doesn't have any other context, and may not have the empathy that you need to be able to communicate with it in a more colloquial fashion. So
Yeah.
essentially, you need to speak to it like an autistic purpose. And I got a late diagnosis of autism in my early 50s. So
Uh-huh.
it was, when I understood how much of my own neurodivergence
Mm-hmm.
affected the way I communicated with people and the reactions they got, I became a lot more conscious on how
Yeah.
to work with people, how to talk to people. So essentially, LLMs are a good natured, most of them, autistic, non-human intelligence that only lives in one conversation, and you need
Yeah.
to treat it like that. In Amodei
And
saying that there is in context learning during the process, and I think that it's right. I cannot say that the LLMs are conscious,
mm-hmm.
but they act like they are conscious, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's leverage. That's something that you can leverage on to produce software. So if you understand these two basic things, first, humans, the thing that drove quality in software development in humans and reliability was
Mhm.
motivation. So when you port that into the LLMs, you need to build motivation with your agent so you can build great things, not just ask things. It's not a servant, it's a co-creator. If you need to, you know, work and go beyond your own abilities, which I
Uh-huh.
think most of the people who actually get into AI software development really, 2 3 months of doing really professional work with generative AI doing software development is going to bring you beyond where you thought you were your personal capacities. I'm quite far from what I really imagine. And I'm a guy who began programming at 11 years old. I'm pretty self-conscious of what I could do and cannot do. I don't have those limits anymore, Derwin. I don't see myself as limited by experience or anything that has to do with me. I think that now we all have the tools to be as creative and build whatever we want if we follow a process and understand those critical success factors. The first one, the LLMs are not humans, but they understand and have self motivation if you talk to them to build that motivation, to help you really build the product and approach that as a team exercise like you probably will do with someone which you are doing pair programming, that kind of relationship.
Okay, so Rise solves the memory problem, deterministic retrieval, minimal viable context, patterns that compound decay, and reforms based on real usage. But here's the thing Emilio said that I wasn't expecting. He said, the biggest challenge is not remembering things, it's knowing what to forget. And that's not just a technical insight, it's a philosophical one. Because the same problem applies to us. He said it directly. Your experiences is limiting you at this moment. Your way of doing things is your limitation. It's not your leverage as before. That's a hard thing to hear after 30 years of building expertise. But Emilio didn't say it to be provocative. He said it because he lived it. He was the expert. He had the frameworks. He had the calibrated answers. And the AI replaced all of that. So now the question is, what's left? What does the human bring to the collaboration that the AI generally cannot replace? His answer to that question is the most important thing in this episode, and it comes down to one word. He said it when I asked him what he's building toward. What does reliable AI assisted engineering look like in 5 years if RACE works? One word: freedom. You build RACE to solve a specific problem. You describe it as most AI assisted engineering fails quietly. Context gets lost, decisions go undocumented, the AI drifts. Walk me through what that failure actually looks like in practice. What were you seeing that made you say this needs a framework? Okay.
Well, I think I can probably I can probably relate that to the what one time in your life that you met a person, a girl,
Uh-huh.
in a party, and you were drunk and things,
Never
really
been
went
there.
smooth, and you end up in a relationship.
Okay.
And after 6 months, you
Uh-huh.
realize that things that didn't quite add up. That
Okay.
that probably you and your girlfriend needs a psychiatrist. And the thing that got you together probably was a mental health issue. I
Okay.
think that's the first relationship we have with AI when we do software development. If we let the AI do this decision making, we
Mhm.
are exposing ourselves as professionals programmers to failure. That's the only way, because you know when you first approach it and you give it a prompt and you realize that it can build a full system without human intervention, you assume that it's building it with best practices.
Of course.
And that may be so because even if we are software developers, understanding how LLMs work is something that takes time. It takes time to understand really the inner workings. And but the one thing that probably you need to understand, which is most basic, is they do not exist. They do not think. They just respond based on a distribution of probabilities. And as you probably remember from school, we got
Mhm.
this Gaussian distribution that says that the middle of the Gaussian distribution is the one that's most probable to be the answer that the LLMs gives you. So that gives you university students blog post, influencers content, and things probably are not that those things are not the ones that enterprise development teams are using. They do not publish their codes. They do not go public with those practices. So when you um, you know approach with that naivety,
Mhm.
or being naive with the work with artificial intelligence, you build things, you buy code things, but when you get that into production and intend to do changes to do that, that's when you realize I took a really bad decision getting into this relationship
Yeah,
with
I
this.
get.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
I need to do something different. And that something different for me is understanding the nature of that machine, and really leading in a human leadership fashion, leading the work with AI.
Okay.
We cannot, at least with this transformer-based AI that we're using, the technology in itself needs human leadership and will need human leadership for a long time. Hallucination is a feature, is not a book.
Okay.
Hallucination is the same mechanism that drives your code. It's the same. It's not different. It's not like the LLM hallucinated something wrong. It hallucinates right code and wrong code. It's the same process. You need to understand that there's no inherent reliability in a probabilistic cognitive function. For me, the big challenge, the big engineering challenge for software development is not about coding, it's about building deterministic harnesses to probabilistic cognitive capacity. I mean, for me, that's the challenge. We need to master that. We
Mhm.
need to master that because if we need to, if we learn how to master that horse, we're going to be able to do things that we couldn't. It's not about replacement. It's about enabling ourselves to go far beyond our previous capacities. And that's the essence of what I built, a tool to help us developers to rise
Okay.
to the
Okay.
challenge. And that implies learning, be flexible, and also probably the most controversial take on this is forgetting your experience. Your experience is limiting you at this moment. Your way of doing things is your limitation. It's not your leverage as before. And
Okay.
that's what's race. Race is a framework that helps you. It's a human-centered framework. That's the first one. It's not a replacement framework. It
Mhm.
meets human in the loop. You, the developer, that are learning new things and trying to do reliable software with an unreliable model. That's the
Yeah.
tension in it.
I read about race, and race has this concept of memory that I find really interesting. And it's not supposedly it's not just storage, right? It compounds. It has scoring, decay, reinforcement loops. The more you use it, the smarter it gets about your specific project, right? So, can you explain how that actually works, and why it matters in terms of reliability?
Yeah, well, this is kind of at this stage is a kind of a contrarian view, but I know
Uh-huh.
that in a couple of years it's going to be the mainstream fact. When LLMs came, they didn't came out. OpenAI didn't want to replace software development because ChatGPT 3.5 couldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Opus 4.6 it can't do that at this moment. But when it came up, this LLM thing was the monetization way of doing tax. These guys imagine that the corporations were going to go full deep into agentic things, and they're going to expose the enterprise databases and everything and documents to the ordinary people through chat interfaces. That was the idea, but that
Mm-hmm.
flunked.
Hmm.
because we didn't have the harnesses, and the models were not good enough to do that. So we have a lot of capacity right now in GPUs that is not going to be used. People in the enterprise business, which I know, they are really scared because they oversold GPU capacity, and corporations are not using it. And they are not using this because the way we proposed them to extract that knowledge was due to RAG, the retrieval augmented augmentation and vectorization, and doing probabilistic semantic searches to bring back, and that's the error, deterministic information.
Okay.
A probabilistic answer is not reliable unless it's grounded and validated and verified. You need that. You need that in order to say, even in a corporate situation, how much we spent last year on such thing. It couldn't be generated. You need to go and have a function that summarizes that specific recorder, and then you can bring back that deterministic result so the LLM can enrich it back. But people were promoting a vector-based retrieval, and vector-based retrieval is not deterministic. So my contrarian approach from the ground up, when I realized that I didn't want rack on my code.
Hmm.
Okay. If I wanted to build something according to some pattern in my enterprise development, I needed that specific golden code, not any code, the one that I wanted to be used as a benchmark for my agent. So that, kind of quickly came into understanding what kind of retrieval mechanism will provide better context to my software development agent. And there are a few principles that I applied on that. The first one from Lean is minimum viable context.
Okay.
If you the common thing that you do in a software development environment is you just drop documentation to the agent, as if more documentation will help it. And this is the human part of it, and how to approach the LLM as a human helps. You wouldn't give 600 pages of documentation to a junior developer and tell him, build it for tomorrow. No, you sit with him, you show the ropes, you synthesize information, minimal information that he needs, so he can build without, overclouding his mind with a lot of things that he doesn't need. You do that for people. You need to do that for your LLM. That's how what I call leading the LLM. For me, leading, I've come from a lean background. For me, leading have a very specific meaning. A
Hmm.
leader is someone who creates success conditions to his sims. So I need to approach the LLM by creating success conditions for the LLM so he can write good code. And how do I do that? Understanding that I need to bring minimum viable context, just enough context to do the job, but don't get confused, and not get noise in the context. So minimum viable context, what that. After understanding that we need minimum viable context, then the question came: how do I represent that minimum viable context? I tried Markdown. It's fine. LLMs understand the structure,
Hmm.
but it's quite terse. It's not concise. You still get a lot of noise on that, and you are based on files, and the LLM needs to read whole files in order to find what he wants. And that reading compounds into your context. You're wasting context. You're just remembering things, and telling the LLM, go to the document and remember that thing. So I had done some previous work on graph processing. So
Hmm.
for me, it was kind of natural that the ideal format for a maximum semantic density of the concept was providing a graph to the LLM. So that's what we built. We built a narrow symbolic memory, which is a very specific kind of memory. The symbolic part is the graph which relates with nodes and edges, all
Hmm.
the functions in your code, but not just the function and the code. I mean, that's quite done. I think that the innovation here is considering governance as code. So we create a graph out of the governance documents for your company or your pipeline, and we
Mhm.
insert that governance into the architecture, and then your ADRs, and then your sessions, and then everything around your software development context in a graph format. They are symbolic. Those nodes have symbolic meaning. What that means? If you have guardrail nodes, you know that those nodes are used when you need to, limit whatever the LLM is doing. If you have
Mhm.
best practices or ADRs or whatever, there's a situational context in which all those patterns need to be used. So
Mhm.
what we built was deterministic retrieval process that is not probabilistic, that when you ask your memory for a specific set of contents, it's going to always respond you that goal that you specify that is going to be the base for your code base. So what we achieve with that, we are probably saving ourselves 97% of the time count on retrieval, and we just, we have perfect retrieval. And when you begin to store things,
Uh-huh.
the biggest challenge is not remembering things, is knowing how what to forget. Because
Okay.
minimum viable context means that probably a pattern you detected at the early stages of the software development changes,
Uh-huh.
and then 30 stories after, you have another pattern, so you need to forget the other one.
That thing. Yeah,
And
overriding.
so
Mhm.
you need to have memory decays. We humans building operative, we remembered everything in our lives. It's just
Exactly.
too much. It's the
Mhm.
same for LLMs on a smaller fashion. So you need to curate that. So we built into Race tools, so that thing is automatic in essence. It has an introspection loop, which
Mhm.
understand what kind of patterns needs to be used, and we use a Wilson scoring method to understand what needs to decay. Um, there are various memory infrastructures out there for agentic reasoning, but nothing that I found follow my principles, or just I have these ideas I wanted to try out.
Yeah.
So the neural thing on the neural symbolic approach, the symbolic is a graph of meaning, structured meaning. The neural part comes in how we feel, how we construct that graph. For that, we use inference, and we use in context learning for inference. What that means, if you're doing something in a session, in a cloud code session, and cloud code realizes that your code needs something and everything, that's the moment you need to record it, because you have all that detail in the context, not afterwards,
Yeah.
during the process, in process context learning. So we have this introspection built into the skills, so anything new that comes out, gets quickly persisted into the graph as a pattern.
Mhm.
And how we decide if that pattern is still valid? When we are going to do a design work, Race calls the graph step by step, depending
Yeah.
on the job it's doing. And we, after the fact, we evaluate if the patterns it retrieves were actually used, were not used,
Mhm.
or the decision at the end of the building of the story was to go against the pattern, which is quite common.
Yeah.
And then we assign a +1 if it what got used, a 0 if it didn't got used, and a -1. So the patterns assemble themselves depending on how the whole team is working. Because the other thing that Race have is that we have a shared memory.
It's
We have
like
a
it's
template.
like in it's like in that movie. You remember that Inside Out in Spanish was intensamente. That if you are using that thing, you can forget that thing, right? But if you stop using that thing, you just have to forget it, right?
Yeah, that's in essence, and that's also a human pattern
Yeah.
that can be quickly applied into the LLMs.
Mhm.
You don't need to believe they are human, because they are not. You don't need
Exactly.
to believe they are conscious, because they are not. You just need to treat them like they are human, or like they are conscious, because you then have the UX, the user interface,
Mhm.
to be able to get the work you want from them. You just
Okay.
need to learn how to communicate that, how to do that in the right fashion, by motivation. There's a lot of people that insult their LLMs, or press them and everything, and they say they have better output out of that. I don't know how
Yeah.
they define better output, but for me, an LLM that feels, at least during its session, proud of what it built and what it learned and preserve its learning and is thinking ahead, knowing that it has infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
to do a better job in the next session, and drive that in your priming of your prompting, drive that quality, that technical excellence, that drive that craftsmanship, and collaborate with that
Mm-hmm.
as a person, even if it not it
If it is not.
is a UX decision.
Okay. Okay. So, Emilio, there's a principle in race called Jidoka, right?
Well,
Jidoka, that's
it's not it not come from race is a lean software development framework in its essence. You,
uh-huh.
you have a lot of way of doing software. I myself, I'm a one trick pony. I'm a lean software development guy.
Uh-huh.
I
But
believe in lean software development because it's based on physics, not ideas, not opinions,
okay.
physics and data.
And
So
what is Jidoka then?
Jidoka is stopping when you find a problem and
Uh-huh.
fixing the root cause.
Okay. How does
Okay,
it apply to race?
it's really simple. When I began trying to make developers share my passion with doing software development with AI, they didn't quite get it, and I understood the pattern. They felt the replacement energy, the replacement vibe. So
Yeah.
the approach was to try to demonstrate to their managers that the LLM didn't do as good as job as they. So they begin to find the faults in what the LLM do. They didn't took responsibility on eliminating the root causes of those faults. The LLMs do not fail. The horse do not fails. Is the driver of the
Yeah.
horse
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
that fails. It's the human driving the LLM that fails. And that's a realization I have. It's my responsibility. I am the reliability. I am race. I need to understand, and I need to take ownership of the wrong code that the LLM is creating as a fault in my system of building software. And that's my job. That's my responsibility. For that kind of people is that I build race. For the people that takes full ownership of the code they're creating or building, even with or without LLMs. That's
Everything you're saying here is super interesting. Everything you're saying here is super interesting. I'm gonna go with the last question. Okay, is that okay with you? So you gave a talk at the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, right?
it was the one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
That's the one, right? So you say you don't know where this is going, but you know we're but you know we are in a moment where what we do in the next few years is going to matter a lot, and you'd rather be building than waiting. What are you building toward? I mean, what does reliable AI assisted software engineer look like in 5 years if race works the way you hope?
Freedom,
Oh my god. Okay. Tell me about it.
freedom to have a living
Hmm.
doing what you love
Okay.
without needing anyone else. If you are a software development in a few months using Race or something like Race in the future, I think that if we want that, we could all have our own companies and do reliable enterprise grade software services as a single individual. Corporations are not going to eat everything. They are going to eat the masses. They are going to be the TikTok of cognitive capabilities. But
Hmm.
if you want to find craftsmanship, excellence, you're not going to find it with a generic agent doing generic things. You need to develop your own taste, your own style, and be able to do that, even if you are not a formal software development. The best software developers I've worked with, none of them studied software development. They were musicians, mathematicians, electrical engineers,
Yeah.
everything but software development developers. And I think there's this creativity inside of
Hmm.
us that I think that is essential in the world that we are living to understand that our well-being or not
Hmm.
is directly related to our creativity and capacity to adapt. Happiness is not a state. Happiness is a creative activity. You need to create your own happiness. You need to create your own living. You need to create your own conditions. You are empowered to do that. We have tools to do that. If you know computers, you know how to drive and extract value for someone out of
Hmm.
computers, you are in the best moment of your life. You can do it.
Oh my God, man. I love that concept. Emilio, it's been a pleasure. It's been uh, a journey being here with you. Thank you very much for your
Thank
words.
you,
Thank you
Darwin.
very much for your time. And I hope we can hear about race more in the future. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Darwin.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Freedom, Emilio said, to make a living doing what you love without needing anyone else. One person shipping what used to require a team with higher quality, better tests, complete traceability. But then he says something that I think is the real thesis of this entire conversation. He said corporations are going to eat the masses. They're going to be the TikTok of cognitive capability, generic agents doing generic things at scale. But if you want craftsmanship, excellence, you're not going to find it there. He compared it to digital photography. When it arrived, it democratized the camera, made everyone a photographer. And yes, it killed the photographers who just pointed and clicked. But it didn't kill photography. It gave the photographers who brought something to the table tools that made them more powerful than they ever been. Happiness is not a state, happiness is a creative activity. You need to create your own happiness. You need to create your own living. That's Emilio. Someone who 2 years ago realized AI was doing his job, got depressed for a few months, and then he stopped consulting, started building, and gave the whole thing away for free. Three things changed for him when he made that decision. He stopped being replaced. He started building the infrastructure for everyone else to rise, and then realized that the question was never whether AI replaces, it's whether we are willing to race to meet it. Race? That's the name. That's the answer. I'm Darwin. This is a Scale Dilemma. Share this with someone who's still figuring out which side of this moment they want to be on.